Hello makers, and welcome to another episode of Fiction Kitchen, where we make recipes from books, television shows, movies, and video games. Today's recipe is the rarest gummy of them all, the legendary Gummy De Milo. The original having been carved by gummy artisans who work exclusively in the medium of gummy, our knockoff presented today will be made with a food-grade silicone mold and a 3D printed mold positive. Well, let's not wait any longer. This video will be split into two parts. First, I'll cover the recipe for the gummy candy, and afterwards I'll quickly cover the steps we took to make the mold. Here are the ingredients and equipment you'll need to make this gummy candy. Please pause if you need to, or visit the URL at the bottom of the screen for the full recipe. Credit to the folks at topsecretrecipes.com for this recipe. Add all of the dry ingredients to a microwavable dish and mix them together. It helps to have a spout for pouring into the molds later. I would recommend trying to contain this recipe to as few dishes as possible, as it does get rather sticky. Next, we'll add the two wet ingredients, the water and the syrup. I warmed the syrup a bit to try to help it pour better, but may not have committed enough heat to the task. The syrup is just sticky stuff. Now we'll come to a step where we microwave our ingredients. Microwave your ingredients for 30 seconds and stir gently. Then microwave again for 15 seconds and stir. Repeat these steps until your mixture has been microwaved for a total of 1 minute and 30 seconds. Try not to get too many bubbles mixed in. Let the mixture rest for 10 minutes. The recipe says the mixture will become more clear during this time, and as you can see in this time lapse, it does seem to. After this wait, stir the mixture again. I had some kind of separation happen with my mixture, and I whisked the layers back together. I think, however, if you want maximum clarity in your gummies, you may want to remove this layer or try to decant it away. Next, you'll want to prepare your molds. You may want to oil them if you don't trust your ability to get your gummies out of your molds when they're all set. Carefully pour your candy mixture into the molds. Allow your candy to rest at room temperature for 30 minutes. Then place them in the fridge until they've firmed up very well. I waited overnight to take the fancier gummies out of their molds, by which time the pumpkins had already set, been removed from the molds, and mostly eaten. The recipe advises taking your gummies out of the molds and letting them rest in open air to dehydrate for at least 72 hours. Some experimentation has led me to think this would affect the texture positively, however I have not withstood the temptation to eat the gummies for that long. The Gummie De Milo came out alright. However, it could not stand on its own and needed some help. I used toothpicks later to help prop it up so that we could see it standing. A gummy recipe with a more firm texture result may be needed for this particular representation of the Venus de Milo. Maybe combining agar-agar with the gelatin, or perhaps cooking the sugar into a more firm candy syrup. More experimentation is needed. The shape of this Gummie De Milo is absolutely at fault, and a model could be designed that would better be able to support itself in a freestanding condition. I personally love gummies, and I'm excited to try more experiments with this subject. Now on to the mold making. I am not an expert mold maker, nor really even more than the most novice of amateurs. This section of the video is more a quick rundown on the steps I took in order to make this mold, and not really an instructional video on silicone mold making. There are many videos and tutorials online that would better service a novice than this. I began by printing the mold positive on the FDM printers at the Creation Station. We used a low layer height to try to reduce the effect of the layer lines, but I really wasn't that worked up about it to begin with, so this is all the effort I wanted to put into that. Next I used some low melt hot glue and acrylic sheets to make a box to contain the silicone. I used clear acrylic sheets just for the sake of the video, so that we could see it as we made it. The base of the silicone cage, you'll notice, is colored blue. I melted some crayons into the wood to act as a sort of mold release. They're non-toxic crayons, so I figured that would not negatively affect the toxicity of the final mold. This actually worked pretty well. Next I used the hot glue to glue the bottom of the mold positive into the cage. I'm sure that there is a more official word for this sort of setup, but I'm going to keep calling it a cage. Here we can see the mold positive ready to go. I used Sorta Clear 18 by Smooth On. It is a food grade semi-transparent silicone. Again, I chose transparent here just for the sake of this video. Next, I made sure that I had all of the things that I would need to actually complete this. Some mixing cups, a bowl to degas in, and some rubbly gloves so I don't touch nothing. Everything is in its place and we're ready to begin. First, I weighed out the two different parts, and you need a 10:1 ratio for this particular kind of silicone rubber. You give everything a good mixing and a good shaking, and then you mix them together. Smooth On recommends mixing in 1 cup pretty thoroughly and then pouring it into a second cup and mixing it pretty thoroughly again, before you move everything into the vacuum chamber to try to remove as much of the air as you can. I basically have no idea what I'm doing at this step, except that I know that you're supposed to try to make the bubbles as small and not there as possible. So I kind of just ran the vacuum over a long period of time. I would let some of the air back in and then pull the vacuum again. I did this for a lot of the length of the pot time for the silicone rubber. Once I had about 10 minutes left on the pot life for the silicone rubber, I decided it was time to pour. And here I pour the silicone into the mold cage. You really don't want any bubbles on your mold positive. Those will absolutely show up in any future cast you do. And I have read that a good way to do this is to pour away from your mold positive and let the level of the silicone rubber kind of just inch its way up your cage. This sort of clear 18 is a lot thicker and gooier than other silicone rubbers that I've played with. It was a little frustrating to work with, but the effect is pretty cool. At this point I was a little worried I wouldn't have enough rubber, but I just scraped the bucket a whole lot and got every last little bit of it that I could out. Online guides recommend having at least a ½ inch on every side of your mold positive. Here's a picture of it right before the pouring. You need to let it cure for at least 24 hours. There are other steps that are recommended, but I didn't really do any of them. So all I did was let it cure, and then use the little heat gun to soften the glue and peel the acrylic sheets off. I realized pretty quickly that I would never be able to get the mold positive out with the way that it was shaped, so I looked up a bunch of stuff on mold cutting, which is a fairly routine procedure with single piece molds. You can look up stuff online about good ways to do that, but be sure to use a fresh knife and hand protection if you have it. These cut-proof gloves actually do work pretty well. Thanks for joining us for another episode, and be sure to come by the Creation Station if you're ever in La Quinta, and follow us on social media. We like to post good stuff pretty frequently. Keep making cool stuff, y'all.